Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Welcome to the Teammate Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach freelancers, contractors, and remote workers, really anyone working apart, how to build better relationships with those they work with and those they work for. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, financial support for the Teammate Apart podcast Season 2 is provided by R2, a fully distributed brand relationship consultancy. R2 has specific expertise and experience in helping service companies grow, develop, and maintain impactful relationships through world-class brand strategy and design. R2 supports the world's best distributed companies by providing valuable insights, strategy, empathy, and tactical expertise to help them foster truly meaningful relationships from top management to top consumer. If the success of your business depends on the relationships you make, then you need R2. To learn more or to request a call, simply visit r2mg.com/podcast. That's r2mg.com/podcast. R2, relationships squared. Also, financial support comes from teammateapart.com. Leveraging 20 plus years of global agency and creative hiring expertise, Teammate Apart provides distributed organizations with access to the best and brightest creative talent from around the world. Through deep understanding of client needs and meaningful relationships with talent, Teammate Apart facilitates a sort of virtual handshake between prospective employer and prospective employee to reduce risk and eliminate doubt from creative hiring decisions. Take a step towards filling that creative-shaped void in your distributed team by visiting teammateapart.com/talent. That's teammateapart.com/talent to learn more. Finally, financial support comes from supporters like you. Members of our Happy Little Podcast community can make contributions directly to the show by visiting teammateapart.com/podcast and clicking on the donation link. Donations can be in any amount and go a long way towards keeping this show on the air. If you appreciate the work we're doing and would like to get involved, just visit teammateapart.com/podcast, click the donate button, and you're on your way. Thank you for your continued support. And now, on to the show. Welcome back to the Teammate Apart podcast. This week's special guest is Pilar Orti. Pilar is a well-known part of the remote work landscape and one of the masters of it. She is the director of Virtual Not Distant, a consultancy which helps teams adapt to new ways of working through webinars, management coaching, and direct work with your teams to establish processes and modify behaviors to foster a happier and healthier work life. She is also the co-host of many podcasts, including the popular 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where she interviews some of the biggest and best names in remote work. Here to talk about the mindset shifts required to be successful in remote work, visible teamwork, being seen when working apart, the importance of community for virtual workers, and so much more. Please join me in welcoming to the show our guest, Pilar Orti. Hey Pilar, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I am very well, delighted to be here, Ryan.
Oh, I am thrilled to have you. We had a moment to talk before the show, and I had mentioned to you that, we've been running around in sort of similar circles, for a little while now. And obviously your name comes up all the time. And so I'm really grateful to sort of put a face to the name and actually get an opportunity to speak with you. So thank you so much.
Same here. I've been listening to a few of your episodes, even before you asked me to come on the show. So it's really nice to meet you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Let's kind of just start at the top then. Let's talk a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what it is you're doing here in the remote work space.
Well, I am in London and I run a company called Virtual Not Distant. And we've been doing that for about 5 years. And in essence, what we do is we help people to transition to an office optional approach. At the moment, in the middle of the pandemic, there's not much option of an office, but it looks like it's going to be an option for many people. So that's what I do. We do that through coaching, through a collaborative consultancy, I call it. We don't know what the best way is for you to do it until we meet you. Right. And then we co-create. I really like that aspect of co-creation with people we're working with. Well, and of course, carry on.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that we have a podcast, the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where I spend lots of time and it's great because I get to meet lots of other people, and we also have a blog. So yeah, that's more or less where I'm at now.
That's awesome. No, I love it. And actually you bring up a really good topic. So maybe this is a good place to start. I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the mindset shift that's happening right now as people are being forced into remote work. And I've observed, at least in the people that I'm having communications with, and maybe you can back this up or tell me I'm crazy. I seem to see a little bit of a difference in personality types between the people who are just doing remote because they want to, versus the people who are doing remote because they have to. And one of the things that I'm observing is that the people who sort of are going into remote work because they think it's the right thing for them, or maybe they have the right personality for it, that it's something they would like to try, I'm finding that those people tend to be a little bit more fortified for some of the problems that are starting to come out, especially as they pertain to sort of mental health, the things you hear about all the time, the isolation, the depression, these things. And then for the people who are sort of work from home, or maybe, with wishful thinking, have one toe back at the office and are really hoping they get to go back to the office eventually, I'm finding that those people are now starting to have a sort of a lift in these kind of negative issues, but maybe aren't really sure where they're coming from. They're having trouble sort of assigning this to, just isolation from working home alone. Like they kind of don't, I guess they're kind of being blindsided by these feelings and stuff. And so I wondered if you just had any thoughts or insights you could share, sort of, A, from a manager's level, or B, from a remote worker's level, on sort of where people's heads are at right now.
I came across a piece of research just today. Somebody tagged me on LinkedIn from a council in the UK. They've looked at how they've been working remotely, and they've really surveyed their people. And they said remote work works best when it's optional and flexible. And I think that is at the core of a lot of what you're saying. I think that traditionally most remote workers are either freelancers, they've chosen to live this lifestyle, or they've gone to their employees, their employers, their managers, and said, can I go and work from wherever? Or they've taken the option. Whereas now we have lots of people who've been forced into it. So I think that's the main difference, is having had an option to something that we liked and enjoyed and suited us, to being forced to do something that's not our preference. And so I think there's a lot of that. The other thing is that, and I'm going to make this up. This is, as one of my fellow podcasters, Richard, would say, this is me search. But if you decide to do a job where you're working away from your peers, you usually either are happy on your own, or have a kind of another social life that is already stable, be it a family or a social, local group, or lots of friends, or whatever. Your lifestyle suits that. But at the moment, we've had people working from home, but also not socializing in the ways that they would like to. One of those social places would have been the workplace, the traditional workplace. But not only have they not been able to do that, they also haven't been able to mix with their own social circles. So all of this, I think all of this must have built up. So we're not just talking about their connection with remote work, but also with having to do that. And the other thing is that it doesn't suit everyone to live their lives through a computer, which is what a lot of people have done also. The family, friends, they've also connected with them through the computer. So there's a lot of stuff. I don't know if that starts to answer your question.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I think that's a great thing. And it's funny that you bring it up, because I've been talking about this quite a bit lately, is this thing that I think for most people who sort of consider themselves a remote work advocate, or somebody who's out there trying to sort of lobby on behalf of remote work, I think they're often misunderstood, and people sort of think that what they're pushing for is all remote all the time. And that kind of gives people this negative vibe, or they try and push back or something. When I think what most advocates really mean is remote work as a choice. And I think that that's an incredible distinction, because, as you mentioned, remote work seems to work better for people who want to do it, or that it's optional for. And I think that that's really what most of us are sort of pushing for, is this flexibility in the workplace. And I think, just to sort of back up your me search here, I think the fact of the matter is that these people who, either relied on their office for social life, or maybe just sort of require in-person communications, it's been a really difficult time for folks. And, and I'm seeing it even more and more. And honestly, I'm even seeing it in myself, which is interesting, because I've spent the last 20 some years working remotely. And I'm even noticing now, after several months in sort of semi-quarantine, and we're not near as locked down as a lot of people are. It's still, I'm starting to now get this little edge. I used to go to my co-working spaces, and I used to do all this stuff. I had this great routine, and now I'm finding more and more that I don't. And I've got just sort of like this little, I don't know, like this little dark fellow hanging out behind me that is I'm having to work a little harder to stay upbeat or stay positive. And so I can only imagine for people who are new to this experience or just flat out don't want it, that it might be really difficult.
Yeah, because you would have had your routine to make sure that you got through your day and that it was okay that you were remote from your people. And like you said, you're co-working. I've got a gym I go to for classes and stuff, and all of that's gone. So yeah, it has also affected people who are used to working remotely.
Well, yeah. And I think that that's one of those things too, because I'm also sort of an advocate for getting your social life outside of work, right? Like so many employers right now are trying to do things like these virtual happy hours and all this other stuff. And I think it's great. Basically they're trying to rise to the occasion and trying to take care of their people, which I think is, very important. But I also like this idea of not being self-reliant or being a little more self-reliant and not depending on your employer to entertain you, right? But as you mentioned, now that we don't have that, and now, I mean, at least here in the States or here in Utah specifically, I can go to Starbucks now, I can do some things like that, but I can't sit on the patio, I can't sit and work, I can't do the things I used to maybe do. And so now, as you mentioned, we've lost our sort of social aspect too, that was sort of our own social outside of work. So it's made for a very interesting time, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And you're talking about the social aspect. One of the things that I feel quite strong about is that it's good for people who like to socialize at work. And there's always a place anyways for stronger teams. You do want to have a bit of socializing. However, some people prefer to socialize and get their social needs outside of work. So a lot of time not having to go somewhere that takes up a lot of your time allows you to socialize where you want to be, and you take care of a different set of needs at work. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. So let's talk a little bit about, I mean, as we've been talking about mindset and things like that. I think I've seen sort of both sides of this, and maybe you can speak to it as well. But as it pertains to the employers, I think I've seen a little bit of this too, where, yes, many of them did make a shift to remote work, but it seems like so many have made that shift sort of like a Band-Aid, right? They're doing something sort of temporary with the idea that they'll be going back to work at some point. And maybe they will, and maybe that'll be great. But I think that's caused people to get kind of halfway in on remote. And I think that that's causing some problems. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, maybe you've talked to some people or met people in your sort of sphere of influence, and maybe you can help share the perspective of sort of the business owners or the companies themselves and how they're approaching remote work right now, and then how that sort of rolls downhill into developing teams remotely.
So starting with people who've embraced it, I heard the other day of a company where it's a small company, but they were completely office based, although they were also in the cloud. So they were already working in the cloud, but they were going into the same office, and they're stopping that. So they've said this commute that we have, it doesn't make any sense. It worked okay. We're a small company. Let's ditch the permanent office. And for that, it has been, well, it's worked for us. We probably have to tweak it, but it has these great advantages. I've also come across people who said, we've been planning to do this for years, and big organizations also, and now they've had to do it. And of course, there's going to be some tweaking. The next step is, how are we going to use the office now? What is the office going to be for? Because we're not going to ditch it because there's too many of us, and actually the place has an identity in the building, and we need this space. But what is it for now? So there's all that kind of thing. And I met someone the other day who's going through they've been going through a transition anyway, trying to digitalize more, use tech. And part of that transformation, it had 3 strands: tech, workplace, and culture. And I think, again, this is something that they want to see what worked, what didn't work, making sure that the things that stick, that they're sticking deliberately, because of course we might have all developed some bad habits and ways of working that are not sustainable. So let's see what we need to change. So I'm seeing that also. I'm seeing that it is an opportunity. Then you do get individuals who cannot envisage that because they want to go back to how it was, and because they want to continue using the office in the same way. So that's when there starts to be a little bit of tension. Yeah, I'm going to stop now. Yeah. What else? Well, I mean, I could carry on forever, but maybe I'll stop.
Yeah, no, I think that's great information. And maybe it sort of leads into this next topic. One of the things that you sort of advocate for is this idea of visible teamwork. And I think that this is something that people could start to employ in their organizations, especially as they're trying to maybe be more intentional and maybe consider a fully permanent, or at least a fully integrated remote version of their business in the future. I wonder if you talk a little bit about what that actually means, what this idea is, and then sort of break that down for us.
Yeah, so I'm going to tie in back to where I was with your earlier question also, which is something that organizations are seeing, that they need to help the managers and their teams work in a certain way. But I think the next step is that they also need, at an organizational strategic level, operate in a different way. So taking this concept of visible teamwork, which in essence, it's an adaptation of the working out loud concept. So working out loud by John Stopper, I think it was, who said it's about making your work, communicating and making your work visible in a way that is of use to others, to you and to others, sorry. So it's about the information that we would have access to in a shared workplace, deliberately sharing that with team members, managers, etc. So there's three bits to it. One is deliberate communication, which is about the person. So these bits about how available we are to others, what mood we're in, our context, things that people would probably, I'm going to use the word smell when you're in the office, subconsciously that information goes in. But when we're in the remote space, if we don't deliberately communicate it, that information gets lost. So that's any communication about the person that might be of use to the team, and that will vary with teams. The second concept is work visibility, which is visible workflow, open conversations, which are the conversations that we would overhear in the workplace, but that if we don't post them in an open space for our team, will get lost. So anyone who uses lots of Slack, Microsoft Teams will be familiar with the concept. And of course, distributed companies do this already. And then visible work, which is about working in the cloud, where our work is accessible to our team members. And then visibility of the team, which is about especially the manager looking out, making sure that our team doesn't become invisible in an organization. And then finally, there is planned spontaneity, which is designing processes that allow us to have spontaneous interactions with our team members. So of course, the big one was the virtual coffee, which 5 months ago, when I introduced it to people in traditional workplaces, they were like, wow, virtual coffee, what is this? We're going to try that. And now, of course, everyone's done it. So now it's about asynchronous communication. How can we create spontaneous interaction when we're not at the same time together? So these three concepts, for me, the big thing is to use them in asynchronous ways so that we cut down on meeting time, especially. So 6 months ago, I would say, you can use a meeting or asynchronous, and now I'm saying, use them asynchronous, reduce that meeting time. But also, especially this concept of planned spontaneity, where we have processes so that people bump into each other in the space. I think that's the bit that organizations need to implement at an organizational level. So companies like Trello, and then when they were taken up by Atlassian, do this very well. They've got systems by which they pair people in their organization randomly, so that you meet people that you don't work with, but that are in the same organization. One of the other big companies has an open Zoom so that anyone can pop in to have a coffee anytime with anyone. So I think these concepts, so that teams can adopt to make their work visible and be visible, can also be adopted by organizations. And that's when you truly start to have, I think, a remote first type of organization.
Yeah, I like it. And I think one of the words that you like or mentioned that I kind of like the most, and it was as it pertains to communication, but it's this idea of being deliberate. I use the word intention a lot. I throw this one around all the time, that it's, that we need to be intentional about this and that and the other thing. And so I really love that concept of being sort of overt or deliberate with the work that we're doing and making sure that everybody's actually seeing it. Because that is one of the differences between sort of a co-located environment or a traditional working environment versus that of a remote team, is the energy basically that you need to put behind your communication or behind really everything you're doing, to make sure that you're being sort of out there with it. And it does take a little extra half step. It's a little more work than doing it in the office, maybe. You can't stick it on the bulletin board. You actually have to go out and purposefully say something. It's not that it's harder, but it is more work. And so I think that that's a really great distinction or a great observation, is this idea of being really deliberate in the work we're doing.
And it starts to be a mindset. Well, it starts with being a mindset because for the reasons you've said. And also then it needs to become a habit, which is difficult. And I'll give you a lovely example. Sometimes you do workshops and something happens spontaneously and it's a gift because it illustrates a point. So I was running an online workshop with a group of managers, and during the break, they all went wherever to their kitchens and had something. And when we came back, I noticed that somebody had logged in twice into Zoom. So I said, "Hey, what happened there?" She says, "Oh, I'm just in another room of the house at the moment." And I said, "Where are you?" And she said, "I'm in the kitchen having a cup of tea." And that was such an illustration of that little bit more of information immediately brings you closer to the person. It gives you more of a picture of where they are, what they like. Now I know she likes tea. And even though that was in a meeting, not asynchronously, but that was a really good example of how much, like you said, effort we need to make in our communications.
Yeah, well, and to even take that one step further, like as it pertains to relationship development, right? This little key that you now know about her when it comes time to give a corporate gift, or maybe she was a client or a
Exactly.
prospective client or something, now you've got this little box that you can send her that she'll love. And
Yes.
but as it pertains to just the relationships we're building with people, I think this idea of sort of transparency, being sort of open and letting people into your life a little bit, is really critical. I think it's an important behavior to have, and ultimately, if you're going to build these kinds of trust, right, in the past or even presently for anybody who might be co-located. I mean, a lot of this happens around the water cooler, so to speak, where you can just kind of make this point, oh yeah, no, we're going out of town today. We're going boating. Oh, okay. So you like boating. All right. I get it. Now I know next time I read the news story about boats or something, I'll come talk to you.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting how just those little things sort of start to add up, right? It's almost like a snowball rolling downhill or something. It's
Mhm.
this idea that we can start to kind of collect intelligence on the people, around us, and then use that intelligence down the road to build and maintain better relationships or more tightly integrated relationships.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, I think the relationships that we build around the water cooler, I think the asynchronous space gives us an opportunity also to build those relationships around the work. So, for example, take that you're giving somebody feedback in a Google Doc, or two people are collaborating. And we tend to be quite transactional in those conversations, which are, oh, this bit is this, that bit is that. But if we just take it that step further, that little bit of energy that you were talking about into it, and instead of just giving our opinion, we give our opinion and then say why. Or instead of, or even for the manager, we can take a coaching approach and ask questions rather than give straight answers, if that's relevant. Or just have more of a conversation rather than a transactional comment. That's another space where we can build those relationships, which we might not have thought of before.
Yeah.
Or even things like Trello cards. That's a way. Yeah, we need to have our radar on. This is an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back to this idea of being deliberate, right? Or being intentional in our interactions with people. And it doesn't take a lot of extra energy to phrase it as a question, for example, rather than just, dropping something very pragmatic into the box. It's not a lot of extra work. And even though it's just like a little thing, like a baby step, these baby steps over time will really start to amalgamate into something useful or meaningful. And, I was thinking about it too, just especially as it pertains to remote work. One of the things that we talk about all the time is trust, and sort of the importance of building trust on our teams. And this openness or this vulnerability, I think, really contributes to that trust. Sort of I guess the more you know about these people, the more you start to, I guess, form bonds, right, that will sort of ultimately lead to trust. And so if you have a manager that, maybe overseeing a small team or something, but that manager knows a few things about everybody, when their kid's birthday is, or, something they like the example you used with tea. If your manager knows that about you and then reaches out and says, oh, hey, I tried this great new tea. By the way, where are you on this project? Like that, I think that sort of back and forth, this openness and vulnerability, I think can really contribute to that culture of trust, especially in a small team. But as we're remote, that little extra push, I think, will go a long way.
Yeah. And on top of that, also, it helps you create boundaries, because if you start to be open with each other, if you start to show that you care by these little gestures, then it means that we then can put boundaries, because of course this is something I hear a lot from people who are not used to so much having to be deliberate. And sometimes people are like, oh, but I don't want to go too much into my personal life. And it's, yeah, we're not saying open up all your personal life. We're saying talk more about yourself as a professional also, and what helps you. And then we can start putting barriers also, because this is something, of course, barriers, sorry, the word is boundaries, not barriers. Don't want barriers, please, anyone, listeners. So yeah, but you can start to put boundaries, which are so important when we're working through technology from anywhere.
Yeah, well, and I think just in sort of the life of the remote worker or the freelancer or the contractor, I mean, boundaries are a critical aspect of doing
Yes.
that work and doing it well. I mean, we're talking about something a little more emotional or a little softer skill, but just in general terms, having boundaries and being able to sort of know what you're okay with at work and what you're not, and all the way down to being able to call, be done with work at 5 o'clock or whatever. I mean, it's really important, this skill of boundary setting. And so I think that that's an important thing to bring up. You mentioned earlier this idea of routine. And, routine is one of these things that I shout about all the time, because for me, it's critical. I have to get up at the same time every day. I have to get dressed at the same time every day. I do, have my 5 or 6 boxes I check until I slip into my office chair. And, but that really helps set my day up for sort of success. I, know a lot of other people who, have pushed back on this idea. Oh, I don't like a schedule. I like to be loose. I like to do this thing. And I just remind them that, your being loose is your routine. Like, that is your thing.
Yes, it's your way of working.
So whether you like to go here or there or whatever. So back to this idea of the advocates actually pushing for choice or flexibility more than anything else. That's what it is in and around boundaries and routine and all this stuff too. It's really about how you work best and what works best for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of sort of the office optional approach. I think we talk a little bit about it in, the general communications that we've been doing, these ideas about, whether or not you need to go back, or whether or not you have to keep a toe in the office, because you've been there forever. And I think it sort of rolls into this idea of change and trying to, I guess, overcome our sort of natural distaste for change. I wondered if you had any thoughts, as from maybe your consulting practice or anything else, where you've sort of addressed issues of change and trying to make this mindset shift to an office optional. Like you mentioned, or what got me thinking about this is you had mentioned this idea where people now have this vacant office space, but they're trying to find a use for it, versus the version of this where they just let it go, right? Where it's gone all the way. But that feels like sort of a half step, right? It's this trepidation or this fear of change. Now, maybe you need a place to entertain, or maybe you need a place to meet, or maybe, maybe it makes perfect sense to keep a physical environment somewhere. But I wonder if that isn't a sort of an avoidance tactic to get out of fully changing or fully embracing remote. And so I wonder if you just had any insights on that.
Yeah, so there's a concept that I really like, which is activity-based working, which apparently has been around for years, since the 70s. And this was a trend that has already been starting for the past few years, which is that workplaces are designed so that you can do different kinds of activities in different parts of the building. So you'll have a concentration area for when you want to do focused work. It's really, really, really quiet. You can't speak in that. Then you'll have a collaboration area where you have big tables with desks on wheels, so that you can meet with however many people around the table as you need. You'll have a cafe area for people who like a little bit of noise around them while they work. So I think this concept is key. And this is something that, of course, lots of companies are looking at now also, which is, we can't just have, it doesn't make sense to have the office just with one desk per person and all the time. It doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're doing emails, deep work, talking to others, that you do it from the same space all the time in the office, when actually what we can give you is different spaces. So I don't think it's a halfway. I think it's a place where we can provide some of our employees with the environment they need to do their best work. I think that's really important, that maybe some of our employees want to come into this same space, again, for that social attachment, maybe for that routine, whatever the reason. However, let's help them. Let's help them to say, okay, Well, today I need to concentrate a lot. Actually, maybe I'll stay home today. Tomorrow, I've got a few in-person meetings. Okay, I'll come tomorrow, and then I'll be in the cafe doing my emails in between meetings, whatever. But I think it's really about thinking about what environment do people need to do their different tasks throughout the day, and providing that. So I'm hoping that that's going to be the view, or going back to or it's going to be a social place. So if you like to have people around you, you can come in, there'll be people around, it'll be buzzing or whatever, or very quiet because there's no one in, which is what sometimes happens. We'll provide you that, and then we'll use it for social stuff. We'll use it to entertain clients. We'll use it to reach out to the community. We'll use it to have town hall meetings. I don't know. But I think the important thing is that it's a choice, and that we keep it because we know why we're keeping it, and we're designing it so that it works for us.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. So let's shift gears a little bit. And we've already touched on some aspects of this, but I'd like to go a little deeper on this idea of community development across teams. So, we talked so much about sort of being intentional and deliberate with our communications and sort of these different buckets that might sort of contribute via being visible. I think that there's probably some things that are related to building a community at the office. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, your experience in community development in remote teams or in distributed companies, and how to build better ones. Because so much of this, I think, like I say, we've touched on a few of these topics, but I wonder if we could have just a more focused discussion on that.
Anything specific around that?
Yeah, no, I think maybe it's, like breaking it down to sort of simplest terms, what makes up a community, and how do we sort of, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if I run a distributed team, for example, or maybe I've been forced into having to be distributed. Now, all of a sudden, I'm having to develop all these new skills that I didn't have before. I'm having to figure out how to make people work online and how to make all this stuff happen, right? And one of the things that might be sort of not done in the initial stages is this idea of developing community there, because it just wasn't important before. Now, there was a little bit, and maybe we had some, like we've talked about the water cooler talk and some things like that. But how do we build sort of a community or foster a community that people want to be a part of? And how do we then take these learnings or this understanding of community and teach others to do it and actually act on it? Is there a bulleted list we could share that would teach somebody how to build a community in their business if they don't already have one?
Mm-hmm. So I suppose the first step comes with recruiting. I think that I suppose somebody who's going to thrive in a community is going to be someone who is open to sharing, who is open to experimenting. And I think that if we have if we are in a space where we can recruit, when we are recruiting, I think to have that in mind also. It's not just about a culture. If we want a culture of sharing, if we want a community type culture, then we need to recruit for certain characteristics or ways of working with all the diversity that will come within that. But just to make sure that the people we're bringing in are people who are going to thrive in this culture. The other thing is to start looking at experiences and activities that we can have as a team that are around the work, but that are not task related. So, for example, a nice way of building that sense of community can be around sessions on learning, where one person a month gathers with the team and shares what they've been learning, or a book they've been reading, or a conference they went to, or a conversation they had with a client that made them rethink how they work. But again, going back to deliberate, we have to make space for that, because it's not going to happen spontaneously. It might, but it's more likely to happen. So, and then shared experiences, building shared experiences with the team, which might be something quite social, like design a treasure hunt for the team to do stuff and set some time, 1 hour or whatever, to do this treasure hunt, whether you do it synchronously or asynchronously, because giving you a shared experience gives you then a history. It gives you a vocabulary. It gives you, I remember then, we could do that, a point of reference. So looking at what communities are, they have shared experiences, they share ambitions and purpose. So I suppose it's also about reminding of why we are there together, and also having also the people that we are helping visible in some way. So, for example, I met someone once who, during their team meetings, a lot of the time in the physical space, they would have an empty chair, and that empty chair represented the client, and that it was always there, so they would remember. And again, that gives you a sense of shared purpose and a sense of community. So I think that's one way. That's one way within teams. The way that I've been thinking, because this, of course, at an organizational level, it becomes more difficult when we're distributed. Because in the team, you can see how we can manage, especially with not too large teams, to find these opportunities. And one of the things I've been thinking about at an organizational level is, as well as town halls and as well as some of the stuff that I was talking about, like pairing systems where you get people to meet within the organization, is the idea of podcasting. And I love podcasts. And this is something that we're looking in the company as a service. However, now it's so easy to put some audio together that you could have that. And at an organizational level, I think that if you can capture some of what's going on in the company, like what are some of the individuals doing, what are some of the teams doing, what are people learning that is not directly connected to the work, but that other people in the organization might be interested in, then you can have a piece of, again, you create a point of reference that people can then talk about. So if you think of the traditional water cooler, when we've all watched the same show the night before, and then we come with a podcast, you could have that. You could have that sense of, hey, I heard you, and blah, blah, blah. Or did you listen to so-and-so? So you can build a whole ecosystem. And as well as that, I'm sure there's other stuff, but I think we need to start thinking of asynchronous ways of building community also, because that gives us more flexibility.
Yeah, no, there's a couple things in there I'd like to unpack. One, is this podcasting thing. I have a great example of that. One of the clients I consult with, really big company, they basically have a goal of they buy a company a day. That's how big these guys are. So they're buying one company every day. And they've got, at this point, thousands of companies that are sort of under their holding company umbrella, right? And when everybody was shifted into remote work, all of a sudden, these guys happen to work in the healthcare industry. And so they launched a podcast. They started a daily show where they were featuring different team members or different company owners from all over their big, vast chain of companies. And they would go to these different people and, tell their whole backstories and do live interviews and bring people in and do things. And it was really cool. And I actually reached out to the CEO of the company and I told him, I was like, I'm so impressed with how you've done, because, for most people, it takes a little time to get going and all that stuff, but these guys were really able to put together a great product really quickly. And I think that helped by, bringing everyone sort of together. And like you said, having a shared point of interest, this gave everybody this one spot where we could go and everybody was getting the same messaging. And then you'd go back to work and you could talk about it. And it was such an interesting thing, and then they were doing, talent contests and all kinds of things, across these companies. They did like an American Idol or, type show where it was, having people from across the company sort of share their talents and things like that. And then you'd vote for them and all this stuff. It was pretty cool. And, but I just love that idea of podcasting and especially now, the technology has made it very easy to get into it. The bar is pretty low. Especially for maybe an internal show, if you don't need to get involved with all the marketing and the more challenging aspects of podcasting. And so, but I think it could be just an incredible tool.
Yeah. And I think also the benefit it's got, and why I'm a strong advocate for that as well, is that the listening of it can take place away from the computer. And I think we need to consider that. We really, really need to consider that we need to just rest our eyes. And this is another way also of signaling to people, look, we know that your work is not just being at the computer typing away. I'm talking, of course, knowledge workers, although of course this would apply the podcast idea to anyone. But the knowledge worker is supposed to be there typing all the time, but actually we also pay them to think, we pay them to reflect, we pay them to recharge their batteries so that they come up, so that they're at their best. So I think something that takes us away from the computer and just gets different type of senses also engaged. And of course you listen to voices have emotion. And that can be such a point of connection also. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, I heard somebody talking about podcasting once as being one of the most accessible ways for people to engage in your content. And it's funny because you think of it as being this kind of, at least voice transmission has been around for a long time, right? Telephone and radio and all these things, right? So the idea is that it's been around a long time, but I guess, it factors in, or maybe you don't factor in generally, but there's, a certain percentage of people who can't read or can't see or can't whatever, and then with podcasting, you can get them in the car or on their phone or at work or whatever. And so in terms of being accessible and being something that can be widely grabbed onto, podcasting is a beautiful format for that. And I think it's really great.
Yeah. And also for communities. I co-host a podcast called Facilitation Stories for a chapter of the International Association of Facilitators. And that's great because we have the meetups, which of course used to be co-located. There is one coffee meetup, but sometimes you can't make the meetup. So we try also to bring some voices, things that happen at the meetups. We do our best to bring different members on so that you can also still feel connected to them, even though you don't see them or interact real time. So I think for online communities, it can also be very interesting.
I think so too. And if you look at any of sort of the podcasters who are very well known and who have these, giant shows, I find myself, I listen to this guy, Joe Rogan, a lot. He's just a comedian, but he's one of the, biggest podcasts in the world. And so, but like, if I just ran into him somewhere, I would feel like we're buddies, like you develop this sort of sense of relationship, even though you've never actually met the guy. It feels like I know you because of this, and so, but that level of sort of loyalty and I guess concern or care for that other individual, if you leverage that inside your distributed company, I mean, that could be incredible. If it was the CEO, for example, giving these talks and everybody in the company felt this, adoration or whatever for their, company's leader, it could go a really long way for retention and all these other aspects of work that you might not even think of.
And it can also humanize departments because some departments in companies are very, very invisible and they do a great job, but because they always do a great job, nobody notices that. So it's also a way of bringing people who are usually invisible in companies. It's a nice way of bringing them out. And of course, if people start being distributed, that gets even more lost. So I think it's also a way of saying, okay, who doesn't really have a voice and whose voice is really important and who do we need to humanize in a way, because or people who maybe don't interact a lot with people beyond their own team due to the nature of their work, they're the people. And so the podcasting, because you can record from anywhere, etc., allows you to tap into everyone in your organization. So it can be really, it can be very powerful.
Yeah, I love that. So as an extension of community, one of the things that used to happen in the before time that I know that you have experience in is sort of this, the offsites, the places, the things when we would go get together somewhere. And now you're not seeing that as often anymore. And I think for a lot of remote workers specifically, or people in distributed communities, those occasional run into each other moments, I think are kind of critical, again, to developing this empathy and all these other characteristics that we've been talking about. What are people doing now to do these get-togethers? I mean, are you seeing any kind of trends or any sort of things going on in your experience, just given that you have background in these offsites?
Not at the moment, not that much, but there was someone the other day asking, what do people do in an online offsite? So I think because we've been for X amount of months, I think that maybe now and over the next months, we will start to see more of that because we haven't even had time for offsites. But I know, for example, Atlassian did like a whole day, because also, of course, they're worldwide also. So they did a whole day online with different kind of activities, etc., and being very mindful, of course, different time zones coming in and out. And I think, I'm trying to think if I know of anything interesting that I've heard. Unfortunately not. Not.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point that we probably just really haven't had time to crack this nut yet, because people have been so incredibly busy just trying to adapt or stay alive, and so it makes sense that maybe people haven't put a lot of thought into this yet.
Yeah, and I think also there is that thing, especially for companies who are new in the medium, that a lot of our interaction has taken place online, in online meetings. And the other day I heard someone who said, the last thing that anyone wants to do in my team is have virtual coffees with their teammates. They want to close the computer and that's it. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, but again, I think it's an opportunity to rethink how we do things. So instead of one day offsite where we're all there and the 2 or 3 people who are ill that day have a terrible time, why don't we make it over a week and design different kinds of activities throughout the week, throughout the day? Use the fact that we are online to expand that time, because now we're not talking, oh, we're going to have to bring everyone for a week to this place and they are going to have to be a week away from home. Well, now it's not like that. So what does the medium give us that we didn't have before? Hey, we can plan a whole week of off-site, only have the critical workers doing their tasks and their job, and everyone else can have meetings with their team. They can have cross-functional coffees. We can have show and tell, where different companies show for 10 minutes something. I think that I look forward to hearing what people are going to come up with.
Yeah, now I've seen a couple things that are kind of interesting. They're I think still more designed to be kind of synchronous, but I think maybe, if leveraged, you might be able to turn this into some sort of offsite thing. Would be, I've heard of companies that are now sending out, like, for example, they're going to do, I don't know, corporate company meeting. Let's say we're going to have an all company meeting. And what they'll do is they'll send like a little care package out to all their employees, right? And it'll say, don't open until this time, or don't open until this date, or whatever it is. And then sort of everybody gets to open their box at the same time synchronously during this meeting. And then they have all the tools to engage or to be a part of it, right? So it's sort of this hybrid version where we're online, but still have this offline tactile thing. And so I think that that's kind of a clever approach. I've heard of it like for birthdays and things. They'll send out, sort of an actual gift instead of, a Starbucks gift card or something that they can buy you digitally.
I think, and also that's going back to the conversation around community. I think that's brilliant that you all get the same thing and you all open it at the same time, and it's almost like, it's not the same, but it's almost like sharing a space at that moment, because you're all touching maybe the same thing at the same time. So it's that shared experience, but through another sense. So I really like that.
Well, yeah. And I think that that's where we're going to find the opportunities, right? I mean, you make the point that people, we're on our computers all stinking day. Like, the last thing I want to do is come back after work and spend another hour with everybody on Zoom. It's like, so it makes a lot of sense to try and do things where you can sort of bridge those gaps. And especially now, if we can't get together at all, or, if there's a way to maybe rethink our get-togethers and do them in small groups so that we're sort of, I guess, compliant for social distancing and all these kinds of things. Maybe there's ways to start getting in person and basically break your retreat up over the course of a month or something. I don't know what people will come up with. I'm sure it'll be really exciting, but at the same point, like, I think that the more we can leverage the technology, but also sort of try and find those sort of interactive or sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of in-person experiences, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, I think in the midterm, there will be a lot more. I'm putting on my crystal ball that I don't have, but I think that everyone is going to be so hungry for being in the same space that I think we might well have more of these retreats and more away days. And also because some companies have decided that they've dropped their office, or that half of the people are not there, then we have more money to invest, and maybe we see them happening more often. And yeah, I think have a feeling that they might well increase.
Yeah, at least in the short term, right after this. I mean, if we do have sort of and honestly, this will be the struggle. I have so many people talking about, oh, what's the new normal, or what's the future of work, and all this stuff, right? And I don't know that there's going to be a day that we just drop a flag and all of a sudden everything's okay. Like we're back to business,
No.
And so I imagine that there's not going to be a clear start date to this, but I do think as soon as sort of the gates are open and people are allowed to see one another again, I imagine there will be a tremendous spike in this kind of stuff, just because we're all sort of desperate for that. So, and maybe this leads into this last topic, just as we're starting to get to the end here. I wanted to talk to you before the show. I had asked you some questions and said, hey, do you have some topics you'd like to discuss, that kind of thing, just a little pregame before the show, pulling back the curtain. And one of the things that you mentioned specifically, and it's the way that you said it that I liked so much, and it was this idea of trying to, or the observations that you've come across during this sort of loneliness season. And I think that that's a really interesting way of sort of putting where we are right now. And I wondered if you could just maybe share some of the experiences that you've heard of, or maybe come across in the work that you're doing, and how people are sort of coping with and overcoming these, issues to do with isolation and things like that. And obviously there's some crossover between what we've talked about before, but I wanted to sort of bring up this idea of the isolation season, which I also like because maybe that means there's an end to it.
So this is one of those moments where we say this is the one of the difficulties with written communication. So the loneliness factor has been something that has been around in remote work for ages, and it was beginning to be a hot topic last year, and it was definitely starting to be a hot topic this year, even before the pandemic. So we had a podcast season on connection and disconnection, which was all about that. It was all about one is how this loneliness can creep in even without you realizing it. And I think that that is something that maybe has happened now, because the typical transition to the working from home during the pandemic was very frantic at the beginning. And it was almost like no one was really even had time to think or process. And then I think that at some point then the disconnection has started to happen, maybe with team members, because suddenly we found again that we maybe had lots of stuff to tell them, but we didn't have the time, or we just couldn't because of our home setup. Or one of the things that I was seeing as well as the beginning is that if in a team a lot of people have the same kind of context at home, but a few people have a different one, like for example lots of people with families and then maybe two people who live on their own, then maybe that different context, which before didn't maybe matter much, maybe that matters more because it's more visible, because we have to adapt more to the other people's lifestyles. I don't know. So there's lots of so loneliness, of course, we know is not just about being physically away from people, but it's about feeling distant from each other. So there was an article in The Guardian about just a couple of weeks ago, I think, or last week, about how desperate a lot of people are to go back into the office because of that feeling of not connecting, not knowing how to connect with other people. So that's some of the stuff that I've been seeing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think to sort of take it full circle back to this idea of the people who were sort of, cut out for remote work versus the people who maybe weren't. And maybe through wishful thinking, they're assuming they're going back to the office. So they haven't worked very hard on being a great remote worker because they really just want to go back to work. Yeah. I think that for those people, especially, it seems like, this sort of these different emotional changes that are going to start washing over people are going to be, maybe even deeper or maybe more, difficult to sort of work through, just because they haven't sort of built up this fortitude for that, or this understanding that this might be the way it is, or, and so I think that it's making for a challenging time. I don't know if you know or not, but we've been doing a mental health podcast recently too, exploring issues, in and around mental health concerns for remote workers. And, it's been really eye-opening talking to these different doctors and therapists and all these different people. And this is one of these issues that keeps coming up, is this idea, back to sort of being deliberate or intentional. When you're forced into a situation where you're doing something you don't really want to do, and you're trying to make do, and you're only kind of halfway in, then you're not really prepared for the stuff that's going to come down the road. Like you don't even see it coming. And then all of a sudden you just feel horrible, or you're in a dark place or whatever, and you don't know how to get through it. And so I do think it's a, kind of a crummy time. And it's also giving remote work kind of a bad rap, which I hate. But at the same time, I think, the more that we can sort of empathize and build these strong communities and maybe for the people who are a little more adept or a little more prepared for working remote, maybe it's on them to sort of, I guess, hulk up a little bit and help their friends and help their coworkers to sort of, lift everybody out of these, sort of yucky waters that we're in right now.
Yeah, and looking into the future also, especially for the people who do work remotely and are going to stay working remotely in hybrid teams or hybrid organizations, don't assume that it's the remote person, the one that's going to feel lonely. But as some people return to the office, there's going to be psychologically, that's also going to be interesting if they're going back to a workplace which looked one way and felt one way and now feels different. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to look at that, and companies need to look at that, that it's not, this loneliness, it's not going to be about where the person is, it's about their expectations. Also, so there was someone in our show who said something about that the loneliness creeps in when your expectations don't match what you need. So I think that's very, very interesting times.
Yeah, no, that is a great observation. I think just that sort of idea that I think in our heads, you know, especially because we had no idea how long all this would be going on, I think in our head, it was easy to think, okay, lights are out today at the office. And then, you know, in a month or whatever, we'll go back and it'll just be lights on and we're back to work. Like that's that, right? And so I think that's sort of the view that so many of us had. And, you know, now that it's going on and maybe we'll go back or maybe we won't, or maybe some teams are only going to partially go back and, you know, that kind of thing. You're right. I mean, the thing that was your security blanket, right, that was your rock is now not going to be the same rock.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So all of a sudden, this thing you were clinging on to for some sort of semblance of normalcy amidst all this chaos, I think is going to, you know, maybe not meet your expectations. And I could imagine that could throw some people sideways too. So that's a great observation. Well, here in the closing minutes, Pilar, can you just tell people where can they learn a little bit more about you? Where can they find you online? How might they connect if they were interested or inclined to?
So Twitter at Pilar Orti. I love Twitter. I also love LinkedIn. I've been having very interesting conversations there. So do connect, but tell me why you're connecting, please. And then, of course, the virtualnotdistant.com is where we have a lot of our stuff. And we have a podcast called 21st Century Work Life.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pilar. Like I mentioned at the top, I'm really grateful to have had you here. Really excited to have had this conversation with you, and I can't wait to share it.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. So thanks to everybody who tuned in this week and every week, and we'll see you all next time.
I don't owe you anything. I don't know